W.E.B. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington, the famous debate on the approach to Black leadership and also overcoming obstacles here in our country. It was a debate that led many intellectuals in our country into understanding our potential and also the issues and the crises within our community and overcoming segregation and racism. But it's a debate that still reigns today. How relevant is W.E.B. Du Bois's and Washington's position as it relates to uplifting African Americans today in America? We'll discuss that, the opportunities, and where we go from here on this segment of the Claville Report. Hi, I'm E.W. Claville, and this is the Claville Report. Du Bois and Washington debate. How relevant is it today, and where do we stand as a Black race as it relates to racial injustice and economic opportunity? According to the Department of Education, both Washington and Du Bois were aware that the need for African Americans to become technologically literate was paramount. However, Washington advocated for a hands-on external approach. Du Bois promoted a more paternalistic form of advancement for the Black race. W.E.B. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington are two of the most prominent figures as it relates to African Americans, racial advancement, advocating against racial injustice in our country. They're two of the most prominent figures that spoke out against this issue. Others that come to mind, of course, is Frederick Douglass, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, and others. But these two individuals, their approach in the very beginnings of this time period of African Americans gaining freedom and also opportunity in a country where that was denied to them for almost a quarter of a millennium, almost 250 years. These two approaches and their philosophies really galvanized the intellectual debate, it galvanized the people, and it galvanized and helped to create certain movements that still reign today. But who were these two individuals? W.E.B. Du Bois was an intellectual, one of the first graduates for a PhD at Harvard University. Also, he was one of the founders of the NAACP. Booker T. Washington himself was someone who literally pulled himself up by his own bootstraps. He was one that came from a very poor setting, a former slave in West Virginia, and heard about an opportunity to educate Black students at Hampton University in Hampton, Virginia, known at that time as Hampton Institute or Hampton Normal. And he walked from West Virginia to Virginia, Hampton, Virginia, along the way, picking up odd jobs in order to pay his way, and came to the institution to be educated. One interesting thing about that is that when he got there, he didn't, quote unquote, fit the bill of the type of, quote unquote, Negro at that time to be educated. But he did not let that deter him because he wanted something more than others said that he could not have. Both Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois were both educators, reformers, and also two of the most influential Black leaders and leaders in general of our time. Their approach to understanding in African Americans and their place in society and the opportunities where African American as a people and individuals could go at the time were at different ends of the spectrum, but it was all to reach the same goal, and that's Black independence, Black wealth, and Black position in American society. But why did this become such a tug of war? Who was right? You know, this is something that's talked about all the time. I remember even as a young college student in reading about DuBois and reading about Booker T. Washington, I said to myself, the talented 10th, that makes sense. I'm in college. This is where we're here. We're being educated, become the future leaders of our communities and the country. And many of us as political science majors, many of us as law students, we hold prominent positions to this day as elected officials, as judges, as leaders across the board. But then as I became older, I realized that, Booker T. Washington, for me, I said, you know what? He was onto something. Self-reliance upon yourself to build yourself up. Just looking at his story. Creating an opportunity for yourself that makes you indispensable to society as a whole, because it's all about economics as opposed to just only civil rights. But could they both have been right? I mean, even Marcus Garvey was influenced by Booker T. Washington. And others. But is it possible that both of them could have been right if we put it together? Before we get to that, let's take a quick look according to Frontline. It's a PBS documentary that looks at these two lives and how they were so different, but yet so much alike. W.E.B. Du Bois, known a lot for his book, The Souls of Black Folk, it states here that here in the full text of this classic in literature of civil rights, it's a prophetic work anticipating and inspiring much of the Black consciousness and activism of the 1960s. In it, Du Bois described the magnitude of American racism and demands that it end. He also drew on his own life for illustration, from his early experience teaching in the hills of Tennessee to the death of his infant son, and a historic break with the accommodationist, as this is quote unquote, position of Booker T. Washington. As relates to Booker T. Washington, a summary of his life, philosophy, and achievements can really be found in the famous 1895 speech at the Atlanta Compromise. This is where he was propelled himself into the national scene as a leader and spokesman for African Americans. In the speech, Booker T. Washington advocated Black Americans accept for a while the political and social status quo of segregation and discrimination and concentrate instead upon self-help and building economic and material success within the Black community. His famous book, Up From Slavery, you can see that in that he tells a story how he himself was pulled himself up and found success accommodating the biases, in part accommodating the biases of white Americans against him, but for keeping in mind his purpose of creating a product and being an individual that's indispensable within society. So let's take a look at this. W.E.B. Du Bois himself said that no, we as an intellectual, of course, studying and being a paramount intellectual, a towering intellectual at that, and a political thinker, he said, we deserve a seat at the table. We should go head first and charge and change society. Coming out of slavery was hard enough. And now we have to endure Jim Crow. He said enough is enough. We have to challenge the laws and the policies across the country, in your community, every local community, on the state level, on the federal level. But he said the way to do this is that we also need a group of people to lead the masses, to lead the group, a small group to lead the larger group for the message to the larger country. So he talked about the talented 10th, a 10th of Black society that would be educated in order to lead the rest of the Black community into political wins, civil engagement, economic wins, but also changing the policies and the laws. Now, let's peel that back just for a moment, and let's think about his position. And we'll look at, in contrast, Booker T. Washington in just a moment. So usually in society, you have a group of members who go off to college. They become educated, and they come back in hold positions within their community. That's why everybody's not a physician. Everybody's not a doctor. Everybody's not a surgeon. Everyone's not a pediatrician. You only have a few that can offer that service. Everyone's not a judge. Everyone's not a lawyer. Everyone's not a teacher. But we all hold positions in society to help our communities go. But there are those that have to be educated above and beyond the minimum of society, which is a very high standard across the world. I want to make sure we understand that. Our American standard of education is extremely high. So we hold a very unique place in the rest of the world as it relates to being educated. But what DuBois was saying is that now we have a mass of people where education was withheld from us. That's key. Education was withheld from blacks that were enslaved. So therefore, we have to educate and put our stock into a small group of people where they can go, become educated, and come back home and help the rest of their community. In that instance, I don't think he's wrong. There's no way you can have a mass education of individuals at that time period. At that time period, you needed a small group. And for the most part, even though it wasn't developed that way outright, it became just that. And what is that? What does that mean? It became individuals that the community galvanized around. Their families, their neighborhoods, their churches, their social organizations, and they gave money to send individuals to school. They became educated. They came back to their communities. They became the doctors, the lawyers, the judges, the preachers, the individuals, the civil rights leaders. They became the business persons, owners of insurance companies. They became those persons, the bankers. So in essence, what W.E.B. Du Bois was saying should happen organically. But what about today? Is that talented tent still needed? Is that talented tent still necessary for the black community today, or any community that is marginalized and not in the majority? Let's put a pin in that, and we'll compare and contrast that in just a moment. But let's look at Booker T. Washington. Booker T. Washington is a very interesting figure in today's society because his rise is not one that could have been predicted. Matter of fact, he should have been a statistic. W.E.B. Du Bois himself was an intellectual. He was in a community where it was pushed, and he was able to become educated. He took advantage of the opportunity. I'll say that he took advantage of the opportunity that he had. On the other hand, Booker T. Washington did not have an opportunity. He created an opportunity for himself, which is what America is really all about. In other words, I believe Booker T. Washington became the American dream before the American dream was actually created. Now, of course, W.E.B. Du Bois himself was phenomenal in its own right. But Booker T. Washington, I believe his story is even greater because he came from nothing. Came from nothing, had nothing, and achieved so much. His story and his approach is really based upon his story of being able to accommodate the biases that greater society has against them. Now, what do I mean by that? I said before, in Up From Slavery, you'll see it, where he didn't fit the type of student to be educated. But he said, I want to do it anyway. He said, I'm not going back home. There's nothing to go home to. Some of us have been in that situation. You know, what are you going back home for? There's nothing there. You've outlived the opportunity that's there. You have to go further. So Booker T. Washington said, I'll sweep the floor. I'll stay here and become work my way through school, but I'm going to become educated. And he did just that. As a matter of fact, even though he was not looked upon as the ideal student, he got the respect of the schoolmaster, the head of the school, and presumably his classmates there, to a point where he became so entrusted. And when an opportunity opened at a place called Tuskegee Institute, he jumped at the bit and became their first president. As a matter of fact, when you look at the amount of fundraising he did, he raised, in today's dollars, over $1 billion for that institution. In today's dollars. That is monumental. But he did it in a way where he worked with and actually appealed to individuals that had money at that time, aristocrats, business owners, those individuals in America that basically was running the engines of America, the railroads, the areas of society where money reigned supreme. Again, not everyone had that opportunity in America, but he worked with those that did. But in doing so, he was also conscious of the position of black people in America at that time. He was very conscious of how he was being photographed. If you look at all his photographs, they're not of him smiling and dancing and or some of the derogatory blackface during that time period. But it was him being serious, him being thoughtful, him being posed, being industrious, him being posed being one that's working, because the image was very important. But in the Atlanta Compromise, that speech, I believe that is one where he was almost mistaken for someone that was only an accommodationist, but not one that was seeking out his ability and society's ability in order to raise itself up from nothing to have just about everything. Now, what ends up becoming part of Booker T. Washington's legacy is that he believed that you should create a product for yourself in order to become indispensable from society as a whole. That way, it wasn't so much about asking someone to respect you, but more so is about creating a product where they do respect you. They respect you on a level where you become the expert in that field. And it doesn't matter if they were white and you were black. It didn't matter if you were male or female on either side. Because you offered the best product, because you offered the best service, because you offered the best at that juncture, everybody came to you. Case in point, at his school, they created bricks because everyone needed bricks to build. So everyone came to buy their bricks because they were the best bricks and I'm assuming the most competitive price around. They became indispensable to that community around that particular product. And because of that, he inspired others like Marcus Garvey, who never had a chance to meet Booker T. Washington because he died fairly young, and W.E.B. DuBois lived much longer than Booker T. Washington. But he inspired many individuals to become business owners, entrepreneurs, and also figures in society to lead. But he just had a different approach. Is the ability to create your own still a valid and viable approach here in America for African Americans and African American community? I think that answer is yes. It's easily yes, because that's the way that America is made. But also, it's very important to be a part of the U.S. systems as well, which is what W.E.B. Du Bois also spoke about. Is that ability to build the black community first and ignore some of the biases or policies that discriminate against black people? Is that an important part of ensuring your financial legacy or pursuing your financial legacy here in America? I would think that some would say that African Americans accommodate biases against them every single day. You know, I was talking with some of my colleagues, and of course, there's this phenomenon in America where black people have to endure. It's called the black tax. And if you take a look at some of our older, our previous episodes about the black tax that I did with a colleague of mine, Dr. Will Levis and Claville, if you go to that podcast, you'll find where we talk about how black people endure the black tax on different issues, whether it be within your job setting, because you're the black person there are certain things that you have to endure that other colleagues who are not black don't have to endure. Whether you're operating in society, just driving while black, there are certain things that you have to do as black people that other people don't have to do that are not black. That's accommodating the biases of society in order to make it just to the next day. Not just keep your job, not just have a promotion, but to get there. The ability to ignore racially insensitive jokes or gestures amongst colleagues, that's accommodating. So, in essence, what Booker T. Washington was speaking of. Now, of course, it was much more harsh during that time period of segregation and coming out of slavery. I get it. We understand that. And honestly, we can't fathom that. I mean, it is what our people went through was nothing less than superhuman. And we have to honor them for what they did to get us to this point. All of us have to honor them. But even today, that type of accommodation we endure anyway. So did Booker T. Washington foresee that as being not relevant for then, but even now? I don't think he could have, but I believe that it's something that we already do. So which approach is better? Which approach is not really useful for black society today? Is it W.E.B. Du Bois or is it Booker T. Washington? I'll argue that both are needed today. I believe that W.E.B. Du Bois was right. There is a segment of the population that are leaders because, in essence, everybody can't serve in the House of Congress. Everybody can't serve on the local city council. Everybody can't serve in the state legislature, on the local school board. But you elect that person that represents your community to serve. Everybody can't be the doctor. Everybody can't be the voice piece for their home. But you have that person that's selected to represent you, or the person that's educated in that community. So to that point, he is correct, I believe. But society as a whole, I believe, can be educated. It's not the talented tenth that's educated in society today, but I believe it's the talented tenth that represents the rest of the educated community today. I think that's key. I think that's key where we have to ask ourselves where the black community is today. Who becomes a part of that talented tenth is based upon votes, our democracy within our communities. But the message and the accountability is solely in the hands of the people of the black community that puts and elects those individuals in place and in office. 100%. I believe that Du Bois is right, that we have to challenge discriminatory laws and policies. You got to do it. You got to do it. There's no way that anybody in society, whether it be the United States, whether it be somebody black, somebody brown, somebody foreign nation, it doesn't matter. Someone male or female, you have to challenge policies that are discriminatory and that stop you from progressing. Hands down, period. You got to do it. But I believe also Booker T. Washington is right. There are some accommodations that we already make because the policies haven't changed. In addition to that, I believe the greatest legacy of Booker T. Washington is self-reliance, creating your own. This is the United States of America, where you can come here with nothing and have everything. the ability to be your own boss, to create your own brand, your own product, and to have the American dream still exists today. And we owe it to those that came before us, the ancestors that toiled and strove in the fields to build this country, our mothers and fathers and grandparents that worked to get us to the point where we are, and to ourselves that are working for our generation. So, in essence, who was right, DuBois or Washington? Is that argument, is that debate still relevant? In part, they both were right. But in 2023 and beyond, we still need, that debate is still there, but it's no more a debate, but it's solutions. Self-reliance and fighting against injustices go hand in hand. They're not separate. Ensuring that we can build ourselves up and understand that we can become educated in a country that allows you to become educated, to believe what you want to believe, do what you want to do, as long as it doesn't go against the laws and policies of the community, and to create the wealth that you want to create. There's no better place to be. But ensuring that we help those that are behind us and fight against those injustices, they go hand in hand. W.E.B. Du Bois, the great intellectual, Booker T. Washington, the educator and leader, two prominent figures that started a conversation and led by example that we still look upon today. This has been E.W. Claville, and you've been listening to the Claville Report. We'll see you next time.